Hello friends, Namaste, Sasrikar and Salam. Welcome to yet another episode of the talk show Sajanaya Tourism, Hospitality and Aviation. Today is a panel discussion. It's not an interview. We are going one step ahead and we have a panel discussion and we have two panelists as members, both are eminent educationalists. I would like to introduce you first to Mrs. Anita Garware. Stands apart not just the voice of the monthly circulated newspaper, Voice of Malabar Hills, but has made a mark as a chairperson of Indian Heritage Society. She has also written a number of articles to introduce us to the history of South Mumbai and its relevance to the local citizen. One of her favorite projects has been the Ban Ganga. Mrs. Anita Garware has always been and actively involved in the functioning of GICED and is a constant source of inspiration and guide to both students and faculty. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Sajan. Pleasure being here. Pleasure being with students.
Also, I would like to introduce you to our other panelist, Mr. KCR Raja, who's a veteran in the field of academics. He has held many prestigious positions, including being the founder director of GICED, University of Mumbai. Presently, he is located in Bengaluru and works as a senior consultant to managers and senior officers and startups. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Sajan.
Yes. So let's go forward. The topic for the day for discussion is skill-based training and its relevance today. That is the topic. And ma'am, we would like to start with you by asking, in the 1980s, when education was more of BA and BCom, and then you do your further education and go, how did Garware Institute as an institute find it challenging to convince people to start skill-based training post-12th? What are your thoughts on that?
Sajan, when I was in college and when youngsters grew up, you only had art, science or commerce. And at the end of it, you got a degree which you were very proud of, but which could not be used.
Yeah.
Every industry turned into a training ground. So therefore, it had to be a collaboration between the educational institutions and industry to make education more meaningful to youngsters. And this is how the Garware Institute was started, that we must make education something that is required by industry and by students to further their career.
Mm-hmm. So your thoughts, sir? How was it to break the shell post 12th and then start education, skill-based education?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, I think, as Mrs. Garware said, it is not an easy job because the universities had been used to the traditional liberal arts curriculum, and to introduce in the university any course where +2 or even post matriculation, of course, could not even be thought of. To introduce any course which is purely skills based was a very difficult thing. The Garware Foundation, Mrs. Garware, of course, would be able to elaborate more because the groundwork was done by her for 2 or 3 years before the institute was started. And when the university, I believe in its 25th year, wanted industry to come in and help them, they looked at several projects and tried to invite many industries to come and join them. The Garware Foundation responded and looked at several projects, and they didn't find, many of them they didn't find exciting at all, like in women's hostel and so on. But this was one which was very close to, I believe, Abba Sahib's heart. And this was one which is very relevant and which, of course, is even now relevant. It is not easy to sell this idea at the top. And my own experience after I took over, I found that at the top, at the Vice Chancellor level, or even the Pro-Vice Chancellor level, they were very receptive. We had fortunately excellent Vice Chancellors like Professor Rab Joshi and Dr. Gore and so on, who were receptive and who were helpful. But the Vice Chancellors themselves were constricted by group, the managing committee, the academic council, who were all brought up and deeply steeped in the tradition of a university culture, which did not permit looking at a new skills-based autonomous institution. Of course, we wanted to be autonomous right from the start. And I mean, somehow we were able to do things on our own. Lower down, I felt that there was a lurking fear that, oh, these industrialists who come in, let them donate money, and that's about it. We will do what we want to do. We don't want them to interfere. But right from the start, the Garware Foundation made sure that industry involvement was there. You know, you had on the managing committee, which was the advisory committee, 3 representatives of the Garware Foundation and 3 experts from outside, from industry, top people. So we had 6 of them. And when they started talking, naturally, and the Vice Chancellor was the chairman of the committee. So whatever was decided by this group went to the academic council and the managing committee, where the Vice Chancellor defended the decision which was taken. That made it a little easy for us. But even then, we had problems. They say, oh, I mean, I remember instances. We brought out a placement brochure for the tourism students, which is something new. They said, why should we have a placement brochure? Universities always do favor to others. So if someone comes and recruits someone, the university is doing a favor by giving that student. Why should we have? So I spent money. We had no budget. In those days, 3,000 rupees is a lot of money. So I asked for a grant. So one of the members who was on the finance committee commented, oh, this man comes from the corporate world. And, you know, he doesn't understand our way of working. I took it as an unintended compliment. And I went ahead. But, you know, that is the attitude. And it was very difficult to break that attitude. It took quite a lot of time. And fortunately, I had the support of Mrs. Garware and the foundation, solid support behind me. So whenever these things came, it went to the our advisory committee. Advisory committee passed it, and then we got through it and solved the problem. So it was difficult. And it is also difficult to market the institute to industry. It took us a long time. We used to go on bended knees to ask them to take our students for internship without a stipend. Well, of course, Mrs. Garware, Mrs. Jagannathan, they all helped us by talking to the top people, like Mr. Kohli of Tata Consultancy Services, or the chairman of the leading travel agencies like Thomas Cook and the others and so on. So, I mean, that made it a little easier. And I used to go with them and meet these top people, make presentations. And that is the way we did it. And I think on the whole, for us, it is a very enjoyable experience.
Sir, I should add that I am also a product of Garware, and I did my internship in Air India. And I remember those days, the initial first job.
Oh, yes. Air India was a godsend. The Air India Staff College. And I still can't forget Mr. Sharda in the early days. They were a great help when it came to job training and the exercises, the practical training in the classroom, like itinerary preparation or ticketing, all those things. He used to bring books from Air India and then he used to help. It's a tremendous help. Yeah.
Ma'am, taking the conversation forward, we would like to know about Abba Sahib Garware. How did he have this vision? How did he look in 25 years ahead? How was it possible? Because today government talks about, education talks about skill-based training, vocation training and things like that. So we would like to know about him. How did he look at it? What was his vision and such?
He was an amazing man, and I had the pleasure of working with him on a day-to-day basis for 20 years. Amazing from the point of view, he said, I have no education, but I don't want to deny it to the future generations. And education should not only be in books, it has to be hands-on training. This is how the Garware Institute was born, with the idea that theory must be matched with practical training. And this is why 40% would be theoretical knowledge, but 60% must be hands-on training. Our students had to go out and work in industry and not just sit in the classroom and pass on the same notes which we did in our days from one year to the other.
Right.
So, you know, it was, he also felt that every industry turning into a training ground is something we must avoid. Because the first year or so of every industry, when they employ students from the universities, you're spending time teaching them, because they're taught from books, they're not taught on. Another difference between the Garhwale Institute and right from beginning was that the courses would be drawn up by experts from industry who need the students, not by the university themselves. So we had our own academic council, if one wants to call that. It wasn't called the academic council because we didn't have autonomy at that stage. But the courses were drawn up. They were sent to the academic council for approval, which was, sometimes there were lots of fights. And I don't want to remember and talk names, big names of people I've fought with. They're glorious fights. But...
right. So your thoughts, sir?
I think one of the things that, as Mrs. Garhwale said, that Abba Sahib emphasized was learning by doing. And as she said, right from the start, we said that we will have theoretical training for about 40% of the time. 20% will be practical assignments in the classroom, and 20% will be job training on the job in the company. And see, one of the things which, of course, we were very small, we could afford to do that, did was, in consultation with industry experts, we tried to find out what the manpower needs were. And then we got them to come and design the course for us. And so we worked backwards from that. They designed the course. They even helped us in selecting the students. I remember Mr. Mahesh, who was the vice president of Taj Hotel, himself coming, sitting on our admissions committee and selecting the students. And every year he used to send someone, very senior person, to do that. And that went a long way in developing the image of the institute. We had no identity, we had no image, we had no label at that time. And we were not a brand. So we had to get all that done. Similarly, there were other courses. You know, when we started a course in foreign trade management, I went to the joint chief controller of imports and exports. I straight away walked in. I didn't even know him, but I just walked in and I said, would you be the chairman of our course committee? So he thought over it. He said, oh, this is a good idea, because at this level, we don't have people trained. And we don't want management graduates, and so on. So he said, okay. And you know, he, in about half an hour's time, he rang up people, and who would say no to him? He rang up Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan, who was at that time Vice President Exports in Unilever, and who later became the director of Tata Sons. Brilliant person, and intellectually, in addition to being a business executive. So he rang up and said, Gopal, I want you to be on my committee. And Gopal Krishnan, believe it, sent us a draft curriculum for the course. So those are the sort of people who were associating themselves with our course. So it was easy to market the course. Pollution control course, there was no such course running anywhere. We had the help of IIT, with the help of the Pollution Control Board. We had people from the BARC coming and teaching us. What more did you want? So we, by getting industry involved, it is not an impossible task, but one had to work hard on it. A lot of my job was marketing the institute. And we did get results. And that was, and of course, I used to have, Abba Sahib used to call me over and then have discussion. And he wanted this institute to develop into a center of excellence.
Interesting, very interesting.
Which is what we have been working for.
Yes, very interesting. And
It
since
is,
I've
and
got- yes, ma'am. Sorry.
I think it was marvelous the way Raja handled those few first initial years. I know it was extremely difficult to get the institute to where we were when Raja retired. It was recognized on the, I forget which report of the government of India.
I think one of the planning commission reports.
Yeah, one of the planning commissioner, that this is an institute that must be replicated throughout the country. So we were
And the
well
NAC
ahead.
report also.
Yes. So we were well ahead of the skill planning today. And I know that the HR minister then, who then became our prime minister afterwards, had me come across Narasimha Rao, and I met him on how he could take it forward. Unfortunately, I won't say unfortunately, good for him. He then became prime minister, but the job of being HR minister passed on to somebody who was not interested.
So
Sad story of our educational system.
that's the next question, actually, ma'am. The question is, how has the education system changed in the last 20 years or 20, 25 years? As a university, how are they operating, and what is there been a dynamic change in the operations, or is it the same? How would you look at it?
There has been a change. I won't run it down. I think I've had the pleasure of sitting on the Senate of the Bombay University after that. There has been a change. They're more open, and there are more vocational guidance programs that you can do alongside doing your graduation. Even Garware Institute courses can be done alongside the graduation courses. So that is the difference that is there. And it can be done from throughout the campus of, Bombay University, as you know, or Mumbai University, as you know, extends all the way to Sindhudurg. I don't know how many hundreds and thousands of colleges it has under it. Unlike any other university in the world, which is limited to a certain campus. Mumbai University is not. And but you can have courses of the Mumbai University, including the Garware Institute, all the way to Sindhudurg.
So how do you look at it? The autonomy given to Garware Institute, does that make working easier, operational easier? What is your views on that, sir?
Well, we had, as I said, a certain amount of autonomy was snatched by us from the university. In other words, when the university committee to decide on autonomy came and visited us, at that time I was on the advisory committee, but I went and sat with the director. And they said, why are you so much worried about autonomy? You're already autonomous. You've been working as an autonomous institution. But there are, this is not exactly the kind of autonomy that we were looking for. Because within the university system, particularly if you look at the new education policy, that's the kind of autonomy that we were looking for. Within the university system, there were certain formal processes which we had to go through, which vocational educational career institutes in many parts of the world did not have to do that. Completely autonomous in designing the course, completely autonomous in delivering it, completely autonomous in terms of deciding. You see, the examination system is quite different for us, right from the start. The semester system, the continuous assessment system, all that, they know, at least the officials who were processing our papers were not very familiar with. So gradually, of course, they got used to it. This was something which was very distinctive, and our students learned by doing things on the job. So job training was a very essential part of it. That's one thing. Now, you also asked how the education system has changed in the country. Is that the question?
Yes. In the last 20 years, how do you think the system has changed?
Oh, well, when we worked in the 90s or late 80s, there was no internet. The internet did not come. Even computers were a luxury. To get a computer, I got 2 computers of the old 1990s type. And one was very possessively kept in my room. the other was kept in the computer room. And the students used to do all the practicals in the computer science department on a big mainframe. Later, of course, we had a donor and we set up a full-fledged computer laboratory within about 2 years' time. But things were changing fast. And if you look at what had happened between, let's say, 1995 and 2000 to 2010 or so, all these things, the big data, Facebook, social media, a whole lot of things, Twitter, everything came around 2007 or so, as Thomas Friedman says in his book. So that is an inflection point. The education managers had also to adapt themselves to the change that is taking place. The manner in which the curriculum was designed and delivered. Today, of course, people talk about online learning, which still has not really taken off here, but is going to play a very important part. The mass open online courses, MOOCs. We had the distance education program. In fact, Bombay University really, started making money when it started its distance education program with very large numbers for BCom and the other courses and so on. So that took off. But that is a distance education program which is already obsolete. And now the universities are challenged by technology, challenged by what is happening in the learning environment to adapt themselves to the pace of change that is taking place. So a lot has happened. And we are also, you look at the range of courses which the Garvar Institute is offering now. We could not have thought of these 10 years back. Business analytics, you name it. When I went to the institute once and I said, why don't you start such and such courses? You're falling far behind the others. They said, sir, we are already running them. So, things are happening at the institute. Things are happening in the outside world also.
Sir, I want to take it forward because since we are speaking about development and course change, we'll talk about industry also. But before that, now the time is, especially for COVID and things like that, it's high time that we get coding, we get camera education, we get editing, because this is something that is going to be in the next 10 years' time, it's going to be there. So shouldn't we think about it today? Shouldn't we act today is my question.
Yes. Is that, do you want me to
I would like the man to answer first and then come to you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, fine.
I think we should do anything that will help the students today. Yeah. I think entrepreneurship is another thing which we started off, Raja, during his time. But really speaking, we have not been able to succeed. We must be able to make, with students staying at home, having to work online, we must find their minds must be able to work towards other things. Yes, we must take on different things.
So your thoughts?
Yeah, let me give one example. And we have had some hits and some misses. I still remember, Mrs. Garwari would remember this very well. We tried to introduce, and I feel so sad that we did not do it at that time, a course for not what is now called paramedics, but we call them community health workers. We had a brilliant doctor, Dr. K.G. Nair, who suggested this, was very passionate about it. He wanted us to develop, he gave us a doctor to be with us and to convene the course committee meetings, and we put together a lot of material. I even went to a couple of hospitals. I visited a primary health center in a place called Malwani in Bombay, and asked them if they would take our students for the internship, and they agreed. So the idea was that we would get students from rural areas, give them training in basic nutrition, health sciences, blood pressure, diagnostic laboratory analysis and things like that. So they will be a kind of health assistant. Or they used to use the term barefoot doctor. They would go back to the village. They would also be trained in a couple of other skills which will come in handy for them to earn a living or improve the standard of living. It was a brilliant idea. We worked on it. We have worked on the curriculum also. But then you know how things work. That is where I thought that if we had complete freedom to do what we wanted, we would have gone ahead. And today, in the context of the COVID crisis, we are talking about thousands of such people. We are talking not about ashas. We are talking at the primary health center, the community health center. We want such people, the community health workers. The demand is in millions. You know, recently in a book which was published by N. Chandrasekharan, who is the chairman of the Tata Group, and Rupa Purushottam, who is the chief economist of Tata's. It's a brilliant book called Digital Nation, in which they have looked at the technology and the technological landscape in the country today and its impact on employment. And the fear that robotics and artificial intelligence, all those things might lead to a loss of jobs is something which they are countering by pointing out that in several areas, there are tremendous opportunities for employment. Every time it has happened. When new technology comes, some jobs disappear, but many more jobs appear. And one of the areas that they pointed out is healthcare. And is in healthcare you need thousands and thousands of people. And there are other areas also. You don't have enough people. At the same time, you've got people looking for jobs, unemployed. This is unfortunately the human capital mismatch that we have in our country. And that's the sort of thing that we have been addressing right from the start.
Yes, that is what the next question is also. The area of discussion is also the same. How has the industry changed in terms of demand, of asking for human resource? Well, there has been a change in that. How does the industry look at it? Are they becoming more demanding? Or is it something that is we need to cope up with? How do you look at it?
I think, industry has been brought in by the Prime Minister's National Skills Mission. Is a very ambitious project. And government has set up the National Skills Development Corporation. They have now worked out a framework of vocational qualification levels like the NVQs 1 to 10, of which 9 and 10 are relevant to us at our level. And they have got sector-wise skills worked out and industry to do that, which is the step very much in the right direction, which is a step which we have been advocating, we've been doing also. So that's the sort of thing that they now want to do. Industry still suffers from, as I said, a lack of employable people. Most of your engineers, according to your study which is recently done, are not employable because they have not been trained on the job properly. Similarly, you have many areas where there is a shortage of personnel. And there is no reason why these persons should be graduates. And that is our point. They don't have to be graduates. They can do the +2, they can do a diploma. See, you look at Taiwan, you look at Japan, you look at Korea, it is the investment in primary and secondary education, more than in university education, that has really helped them to develop the economy. You look at Indonesia, the small, medium, micro industries, mostly managed by women, but they are not graduates. You don't have to be a graduate, but you have to have the skills for which we need a very, very strong body to develop those skills and to teach those skills. This is just what beginning to happen in India.
Ma'am, this question is for you. Can you recollect any student or any person, any anecdote that you can share with us from the students' perspective? If you remember anybody who has made it from Garware Institute.
Well, one is of course Shilpa Borkar,
Yeah.
who is today the deputy director of the institute. She was one of our students and then went on to be a coordinator and today is deputy. Yes, I do come across students across the world, especially in travel and tourism, who say, oh, we were at the Garware Institute. And it makes me feel very happy that we have been able to contribute not only to their future, but to their capability to earn.
Sir, can you hear us?
Oh, many
You've
many
disappeared.
stories. We
Sir, your camera.
Oh.
Weird.
You're not visible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, many stories. Because in the old days when we used to struggle, we had students who used to come and sometimes earn while they were studying. I know about. I often tell this story to others. There's one boy who was a student of our paints application technology, and they have two stints of job training. One when they learn about paint manufacture, the other about paint application. Now, this boy, and when they are taken as a group, sometimes they are also able to earn, they get a contract and they work on that. This boy learned to do that, and in his spare time and during the holidays, he worked on it. And after his course, he was able to get during his training, he suggested, I think he was working with Voltas or one of those companies, and they wanted to modernize the workshop. So he said, this is not the way to go about it. And he gave a proposal which they liked immensely. And they put him in charge of that. So I remember 2 or 3 years after he passed out, I had gone to attend the wedding of one of our students in Thane. So on our way back, he said, sir, would you mind dropping in at my house? So I went in. His father was a postmaster or someone working in the post office. It's a small room. He was there, and his sister himself. And his father immediately came and welcomed me, and he said, sir, when my son went and joined the Garware Institute, I knew nothing about the institute. I knew nothing about this course. It was the first time that some such thing was being done. And my son started earning, and he got my daughter married off, and he is now able to buy, those Maruti 800 at that time used to cost about 75,000 rupees. So he said, he's now bought a Maruti car for me. It's a great, great thing for me.
Yes.
There was another student, young Gujarati student, very enterprising boy, whose father owned a small paint factory in Baroda. And the father wanted him to do the paint course and come back to his factory. The boy decided to stay on in Bombay. And he went to the opening of a temple, Gujarati temple, in the suburbs. And he said, would you mind if I do the painting of this temple? And he said, I'll do it free. I just pay for the materials. And he brought a group of persons and did it. They were so happy that on the opening day, they especially called this boy and presented him to all the others. They're all rich people, people who run a temple and donate to the temple and so on. And on the spot, he got a few contracts. And he was able, and when he spoke to me, he had 25 persons. He's managing 25 persons who are working for him. There are many, many such stories that I can talk of. In tourism itself, but then tourism, you yourself know about many persons who've come up. I come across these students in the Middle East, in the US, and so on. And there's one boy who, as Mrs. Garware said, we also used to encourage them to be entrepreneurs on their own. And you can see so many of them have started their own enterprise and they are doing very well. My bookings overseas are all done by our students.
So, a little analytical now, talking about today and how that's changed. Because something that's told in 18s that we should have vocational training, we should have skill-based training. And today the government speaks about the same as such, and that should be given more focus on. So what is the relevance today, and how do you look at it as such?
Personally,
Shall
very
I
happy.
respond first?
Sorry. Go ahead, Raja. Go ahead, Raja.
Yeah. You see, the challenge is all the greater today uh, in terms of both the numbers and quality. Because today we have the means of doing it in a much better way. And today, if you look at the numbers, it's really frightening. You have something like, they say between 2020 and 2030. This is the report that I mentioned, the book of Chandrasekharan and Rupa Purushothaman. Between 2020 and 2030, some 90 million people will come of working age. Every month, according to the Planning Commission, now I think they've reduced the figures. Every month, about 10 million people, about 1 million persons enter the labor force. And how many of them get jobs? 10%, 15%, not more. And only less than 5% of these people have any vocational training. And even any formal training. So you have to create gainful jobs across sectors for a very, very large number of people. One of the estimates that they have given, and these are the things that government is taking very, very seriously, is that 30 million jobs can be created by 2025. And they've mentioned a few sectors like healthcare, education, logistics, financial services, agriculture, and so on. And these are the areas that we should really be focusing on. When we started a course in agriculture, I think we were the second or third institution in the country to start one. IIM Ahmedabad did a course in agricultural management. And our students were in great demand. They still are in demand. And now we send our students to Israel for training. We had, I think, some agreement with them. So there's a lot that's happening, but the magnitude of the problem is so big that we really have to meet this challenge. And then the challenge of quality also, which depends largely on industry involvement and the quality of training that they get. I hope that the implementation of the new education policy will bring all this into focus and give an added thrust to the program for developing vocational education in the country.
And your thoughts?
I was very happy to read the new educational policy because I feel it will give, as Raja says, he hopes. I feel if they do follow it and they allow the institutions to follow it, it will give hope to youngsters, it will give hope to industry and to all of us that yes, we are training people to fit the needs of today. Thank you.
Ma'am, last question, last thing, your advice to the young, to the young India. How do you look at it? What would you like to say about to them, to this channel?
Stop grumbling. Because that has become a way of life. What I don't have has become more important than what I have. Let's count our blessings and move on from there.
Sir, how about you? What is your advice to the young?
Well, the last message of the Buddha, shine a light on yourself, don't depend on others.
Thank you so much to both of you all to joining this particular show. I will be telecasted in a week or two now. And pranam to both my gurus. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Sajan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For
Thank
organizing
you very much,
this.
Sajan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Raja.
Thank you, Ms. Garve.